The 15-year overnight success story. Why nobody sees the years that actually matter. The illusion of now. They call it the breakthrough moment. The tipping point. The overnight success. It's a seductive lie. It's the story we love to be told because it suggests magic. It suggests that one day, you are nobody, and the next day, the world opens its arms and ushers you onto the stage. My name is Mac, and today I'm reading the file of a human experience. It is a story told in the first person because the pain, the boredom, and the isolation can only be understood from the inside out. If you're watching this, you probably know me, or rather, the human me that this story represents from the end of the story. You know the finished product, the bestseller, the sold-out app, the acclaimed portfolio, the established business. Whatever metric of success you associate with my name, you see the peak of the mountain. What I'm going to spend the next 40 minutes describing is the subterranean base of that mountain, the part buried deep underground, the part that was built in total darkness, with no audience, no applause, and for a very long time, no hope. This is the anatomy of the invisible grind, the documentation of the years where I failed repeatedly and nobody noticed because nobody was looking. They say history is written by the victors. But the most important history is written by the losers in the quiet hours between 3 a.m. and dawn when they decide to try one more time. This is that history, the archive of early failures. If I were to open the physical archive of my 20s and early 30s, you wouldn't find trophies. You would find a graveyard of abandoned projects and rejected attempts. I remember the first big idea. The arrogance of the beginning is a necessary fuel. You have to believe it will be easier than it is. Otherwise, nobody would ever start anything. I believed I had something unique to say. I believed the world was waiting for it. I spent 6 months hermetically sealed in my apartment working on Project Alpha. I poured everything into it. I neglected relationships. I stopped exercising. I lived on cheap carbohydrates and adrenaline. I convinced myself that this sacrifice was noble, the requisite toll for greatness. Then came launch day. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was aggressive. It was a physical weight in the room. I had built a stage, turned on the lights, stepped up to the microphone, and realized the auditorium didn't just have empty seats, it didn't even have doors. Nobody knew the building existed. That first failure is sharp. It stings because your ego is still soft, uncalloused. You take it personally. You think the world has actively rejected you, when the truth is far worse. The world is simply indifferent. But I didn't stop. Not yet. Between year 2 and year 5, I entered the phase of frantic pivoting. If this angle didn't work, I'd try that one. If this medium was saturated, I'd jump to the next. I was chasing trends, trying to reverse engineer what was popular, desperate for any sign of traction. I launched a blog that 6 people read, 4 of whom were immediate family members. I started a podcast where I interviewed myself for 10 episodes because I couldn't get guests. I wrote code for applications that crashed upon opening and were never downloaded. I sent out exactly 412 query letters to agents, publishers, investors. Do you know what the response rate to 412 blind queries was? 3. 3 form letter rejections. The rest was just silence. The texture of failure during these years wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fiery explosion. It was a slow erosion. The camera returns to the very first image. The single spotlight on the microphone in the empty darkroom. The dust motes are still floating. The feeling of wading through wet cement. It was the realization that I was getting older. My friends were buying houses and getting promotions, and I was still sitting in the same cheap chair, staring at the same blinking cursor, owning nothing but a collection of digital debris. I felt like a ghost. I was working harder than anyone I knew, but I had absolutely no physical evidence to prove it. That is the definition of the invisible grind. You're running a marathon every day, but you are running it on a treadmill inside a locked basement. The long plateau and the psychology of isolation. Welcome to the middle years. Years 5 through 10. This is where most people quit. And honestly, I don't blame them. Logic dictates that you should quit here. The initial enthusiasm is long dead. The stinging pain of early failure has dulled into a chronic, low-grade ache of inadequacy. You're no longer a promising newcomer. You are just someone who hasn't made it. This is the plateau. During the plateau, the work became mechanical. The romance of the struggling artist or the grinding entrepreneur evaporated. It was just chores. It was showing up to the desk, the studio, the workshop when every fiber of my being screamed that it was pointless. Why was it invisible? Because improvement during this phase is microscopic. If you're building a brick wall, you can see the progress every day. The wall gets higher. But if you're trying to master a complex skill, writing, coding, strategy, design, you are often just chipping away at your own incompetence. For years, I wasn't getting better in a way anyone else could see. I was just getting slightly less terrible. I was learning thousands of ways not to do something. The isolation became profound. It's difficult to talk to people about your work when you have nothing to show for it. How's the project going? They would ask at holiday parties. It's going, I would say, forcing a smile, terrified they would ask a follow-up question. Because the truth was, I spent 8 hours today rewriting a single paragraph 40 times and it's still garbage. Or I spent 3 weeks debugging a feature nobody will ever use. You begin to develop a strange relationship with envy. You see others succeeding. Sometimes people who started after you. Sometimes people you secretly believe aren't working as hard. You see them getting the funding, the audience, the accolades. The internet makes this worse. Social media is a relentless broadcast of everyone else's highlight reel. During my plateau years, I was consuming a daily diet of other people's victories while I choked on my own stagnation. I began to doubt my own sanity. Was I delusional? There's a fine line between perseverance and madness. Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, played on a loop in my head. Was I just digging a deeper hole? I remember one specific night in year 8. I had just finished another project that I knew, deep down, wasn't good enough. It was 2:30 a.m. I was exhausted, broke, and lonely. I looked at my reflection in the dark computer monitor. I said, out loud, to the empty room, nobody cares. You can stop now. Nobody is watching. And that was the terrifying truth. If I stopped right then, the world wouldn't notice. There'd be no ripple. I would just cease to be trying. But then another thought crept in, a harder, colder thought. If nobody is watching, then I have nothing to lose by trying again. The invisibility, which had been my prison, suddenly felt like a strange kind of armor. If I was invisible, I couldn't be embarrassed. If I was invisible, I couldn't really fall any further. The compound interest of failure. Around year 10, something shifted. It wasn't an external shift. The metrics remained flat. The bank account remained terrifying. The shift was internal. I stopped trying to be discovered and started trying to be undeniable. There is a massive difference. Trying to be discovered means you are waiting for a gatekeeper to validate you. You're performing for an imaginary audience, trying to guess what they want. Trying to be undeniable means you are focused entirely on the craft itself. You are trying to reach a level of competence where your work cannot be ignored, even by people who don't like you. I realized that my previous 10 years of failure hadn't been wasted time. They were data acquisition. Every rejected manuscript taught me something about pacing and structure. Every failed piece of code taught me something about architecture and efficiency. Every ignored marketing attempt taught me something about human psychology. I hadn't been building a tower that kept falling over. I had been laying a foundation, a massive, sprawling, underground foundation that nobody could see. I stopped looking at the scoreboard. I stopped refreshing the inbox. I embraced the grind not as a means to an end, but as the lifestyle itself. This is the concept of compound interest applied to skill. In finance, compound interest is boring for a long time. Your money grows by pennies. It seems pointless to save, but if you leave it alone, eventually the curve goes vertical. The same happens with skill. For a decade, my skill was compounding pennies. It felt like nothing, but those tiny, microscopic improvements in judgment, taste, and execution were stacking up on top of each other. I was developing taste. I could finally see the gap between what good work looked like and what my work looked like. And for the first time, I had the technical ability to begin closing that gap. The work didn't get easier. In fact, it got harder because my standards were higher. But the suffering changed. It was no longer the suffering of desperation. It was the suffering of refinement. I was no longer shouting into the void, waiting for an echo. I was in the void, building something solid. The visible tip and the final reflection. And then it happened. It didn't happen on a Tuesday at 3 p.m. It wasn't a single phone call that changed everything. That's movie logic. In reality, it was a series of small doors opening, one after another. In year 12, someone with a small but respected platform noticed a piece of my work. They shared it. It didn't go viral, but it found the right 100 people. One of those 100 people offered me a slightly bigger opportunity. I delivered on it, using the skills I'd spent a decade honing in the dark. That led to another opportunity. Suddenly, the compound interest curve started to bend upward. The external world viewed this as an explosion. To them, I had appeared out of nowhere. I was fresh, new, an overnight sensation. I remember sitting in an interview shortly after making it. The interviewer, well-meaning and enthusiastic, asked, "What was it like when you realized you had finally succeeded? Did you pop champagne?" I remember looking at them and feeling a profound sense of anticlimax. There was no champagne moment. There was just relief. A deep, exhausting exhale that lasted for about 6 months. The success, when it arrived, felt less like a victory parade and more like finally being allowed to put down very heavy luggage I had been carrying for 15 years. Why am I telling you this? Why have the AI read this file of old wounds? Because if you're watching this, there's a good chance you are currently in the invisible years. You're in year 3, or year 7, or year 10. You're looking at your own empty inbox. You're feeling the crushing weight of indifference. You are comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's highlight reel. I want you to know that the silence is normal. The feeling of invisibility is not a symptom of failure. It is a symptom of the process. If you're building something worthwhile, it will take longer than you think. It will cost more than you budgeted. It will require a version of you that doesn't exist yet, a version you have to forge in the dark. Do not mistake the edge of your current visibility for the edge of your potential. The world only celebrates the harvest. They do not care about the planting, the watering, or the long seasons of drought. But you must care. You must fall in love with the dark dirt and the slow process of growing roots. Keep working in the dark. Keep compounding your pennies. Eventually, the lights will turn on. And when they do, you won't need to pretend you belong on the stage. You'll be the only one who knows you built the entire theater brick by invisible brick.